Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Inshallah, in this short video, I just want to go through a short video which features the Grand Mufti of Libya, in which he calls upon the rulers and the armies in the Muslim world. So inshallah, without further ado, I'm going to play this video.
فالله يعني الذي ينتظره منكم آخر الأمر ترون هذه المآسي على مدى شهور طويلة. ماذا تنتظرون؟ ما الذي تنتظرونه يا جيوش المسلمين، يا جيوش العرب، يا طيارون، يا من تطيرون بالميغ وبغير؟ ماذا تنتظرون؟ هل تنتظرون أن يأتيكم الإذن من ملك الأردن ولا من رئيس مصر ولا من رئيس السعودية؟ أبدا والله. إذا لم تنتفضوا لكرامتكم، إذا لم تنتصروا لإخوانكم، إذا لم تنتصروا لدينكم فستهلكون، والله فستهلكون. تهلكون لأنكم تخليتم عن إخوانكم وتخليتم عن دينكم وتخليتم عن مروءتكم. حتى النصرة التي كانت يعني تدفع إليها الحمية لم توجد فيكم الآن. لو خرج 3 ولا 4 بطياريهم وضربوا وسقطوا في إسرائيل واستشهدوا والله لنالوا الفوز ونالوا الكرامة. كيف تسكتون عن هذا العار؟ والله هذا عار وهذا خزي وهذا ذل لا يمكن أن يرضى به المسلم، ولا يمكن أن ترضوا به، ولا يليق بكم ولا بتاريخ المسلمين. فعليكم النصرة. هذا تفريط الحكام وتفريط جيوشها.
So as you can see, the Sheikh made it very clear that, this is the Grand Mufti of Libya has made it very clear about the responsibilities placed upon not just, the general population, but specifically the armies. Now, if you remember a previous video that I did, I think it was the last video that I did that I uploaded to this channel, I talked about how we need to engage with the ulama, with the institutions, the Islamic institutions around the Muslim world to make a very clear proclamation, very clear legal verdict, very clear fatwa, in which it's an obligation for the Muslim armies to go out and liberate and defend the Muslims of Gaza and Palestine generally. Because as we're seeing now, there is a genocide. Israel has been given carte blanche. They have been given all the weapons and the support from America, from Donald Trump. Donald Trump has basically said, whatever Israel wants, we will give them. If they want to ethnically cleanse, we'll allow them. If they need the 2,000-pound bombs, we'll give them the 2,000-pound bombs. So we can see this that's taken place. Just on Eid Day that took place in Gaza, 70 people, most of them women and children, were martyred just on Eid Day. Now, what shame is it for us? So what does the Sheikh say? The Sheikh makes it very clear that he makes a few points. Firstly, he makes the point that it's a negligence that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala expects from the Muslim armies, that they engage and liberate. And it's a negligence. It's a negligence of a fard, of a duty, that they will be accountable before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In essence, this is what he's saying, that they're going to be accountable before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if they do not come out and try to do as best as they can to rescue the Muslims of Gaza and Palestine generally. This is what's really important. This is what's an obligation placed upon the ummah. And what's really interesting here, he also makes the point about the rulers, and he basically says, what are you waiting for? And he's talking specifically, let me just make this very clear, he's talking specifically to the fighter pilots, he's talking to the armies, he's talking to the armies of the Muslimin, the armies of the Arabs. He's not talking about just ordinary individuals per se, because as we know, ordinary individuals do not have the power, the capabilities. We can't even cross the border without a visa. We can't even cross the border in order, we will get stopped by the armies of Egypt or the armies of Jordan from entering even into Palestine today. Just even to give aid is being blocked by the Israelis, the Zionists themselves. So he's not saying about individuals going, me and you. This is not the obligation. The obligation primarily rests upon, the obligation is upon all of us, but primarily rests upon the people of power, the people who are defending the very borders of Israel, preventing people from aiding their brothers and sisters in Gaza and in Palestine generally. This is what he's saying. He's saying it's their obligation that they have to engage, utilize their weaponry. What's the point in having fighter jets? What's the point in having tanks? What's the point in having guns and weaponry? What's the point in calling yourself the Egyptian armed forces or the Jordanian armed forces or the Saudi armed forces or Muslim armies when you are seeing Muslims being devastated for a genocide and you're not willing to engage in any act to defend them? What shame. And he makes the point. He says this is a humiliation. And wallahi, it is a humiliation. And it reminds me of the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which has been mentioned by various speakers in recent times, in last few weeks or so. But, and I've mentioned this hadith before in the various talks and circles I've given over the years, and something struck me about this. I don't know, for some reason, sometimes you don't realize what it's saying. The hadith is what? It talks about how the Prophet ﷺ said, there'll come a time, I'll paraphrase, there'll come a time in which the disbelievers, the non-Muslims will come and they'll come to the ummah and feed upon the ummah like people that are coming to feed upon a feast. They'll feed upon them and they'll feed upon the ummah like this. And we see this, whether that's Gaza in terms of the utter destruction and the horror that's taking place there. It's just, honestly, it's like, how can any of us be happy, be satisfied? We celebrate Eid outside of Palestine. It's a joyous occasion, but how can any of us actually have any joy with regards to what we have witnessed in terms of their Eid, their Ramadan, the fact that they're facing slaughter, that the level of destruction of buildings across Gaza is absolutely shocking. It's horrifying. It's something unimaginable, to be quite frank. We see that in Gaza, but even if we talk about the Rohingya Muslims, or we talk about the Muslims in Kashmir, or we talk about, prior to that, the Muslims of Iraq who were attacked by America and the coalition forces, or the Muslims of Afghanistan who were also attacked by America and the coalition of forces, or if we talk about before that, Chechnya and Bosnia, the list of Muslim massacres over the last 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years or so has been unimaginable, to be quite frank. And so this hadith where the Prophet ﷺ, he said, there will come a time when the disbelievers will come and feed upon the ummah, like vultures coming, feeding upon a carcass, that this will be, our state of affairs. And the Sahaba, may Allah be pleased with them, they were like, how can that be? How could this ummah, supported by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, supported by the guidance given to us by the revelation, how could we be in such a weak, pathetic, humiliated situation that we'd be fed upon like people ravenously feeding upon a feast? How could we be that? Is it because, and this is what they said, is it because we are few in number? And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, as many of you will know, he said, no, you won't be few in number. You'll be many. You'll be large numbers of people, but you'll be like the scum that floats on the ocean, that holds no weight, that has no power, that has no, effect upon the ocean. You're basically nothing, even though you are massive, large in number. And the Sahaba said, how could that be? How could that be that we are so big, yet we are so weak and humiliated that we would be fed upon? And the Prophet ﷺ, he said, that's because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will place al-wahan from the hearts of the disbelievers into your hearts. And the Prophet and the Sahaba, they said, what is al-wahan? And the weakness. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said, it's the love of this world and the fear of death. The love of this world and the fear of death. This is the reality. And this is the point in regards to this hadith, that I've mentioned it, over the years in various talks and circles. I've heard it in various years by other speakers, by other scholars and sheikhs talking about this hadith. And one thing that I didn't realize, and it made me reflect in the last few days, few weeks, this hadith is not talking about the ummah out there. This hadith is talking about you and me. We are the scum. We are the scum. We, collectively, we're part of this 2 billion man ummah, 2 billion people. We are part of this. This hadith is talking about us. We're the scum. We're the froth. We're the ones who are humiliated. We're the ones that are the reason why we're seeing such a situation that we're seeing today. That's such a shame. And the reality is this, is that the reason why we've got into this situation is because we are unwilling to speak out. Even just to speak out, to be quite frank, is not even enough. But we are unwilling to even just speak out and say no, not just no to genocide, not just no to ethnic cleansing, but we are unwilling to speak out and say it is a farad, it is an obligation upon the armed forces of the Muslim lands. It's an obligation upon the people of power. It's an obligation upon those who hold the reins of power that they must go in there with the armed forces. Because as soon as you say this, what happens? What happens? Some people will turn around and say, brother, don't you know America is too powerful? Israel is too powerful. Don't you know we're too weak? We can't compete. We are too scared. We have too much love of this world and fear of death that we are fearful regardless of what will happen to us if we speak out or if we call for the armies to move. And similarly, Muslims are also fearful for saying this because they said, well, we'll be cancelled. We may have security forces investigating us. We may have our YouTube videos, channels shut down, whatever it is. That we are scared to talk about these things. And when we say to the scholars that you also need to speak out, whether you live in the West or you live in the heart of the Muslim Ummah, whether you are a scholar from Al-Azhar, whether you are in Al-Azhar or Zaytun or Saudi Arabia or elsewhere around the Muslim world, what do they say? We can't speak out. Our governments, they'll crack down upon us. Fear. This is the point. It's the fear. Because the first thing we have to break is the fear. The first thing we have to do is break this fear so at the very least we can make it clear to the Ummah whose obligation it is in order to work for change, in order to liberate and defend the people of Palestine. We're unwilling to do this. Scholars are unwilling to do this. This is why I thought it is very important. This Grand Mufti of Libya is speaking the truth and we need to support him for it. And he makes another point, which is really important, because he also says, he says, what are you waiting for? He's speaking to the armies, to the pilots. What are you waiting for? Are you waiting for your rulers to tell you to go? No. Break the chain of command. There is a Sharia principle in Islam. That principle is that there is no obedience to creation in the disobedience to the Creator, to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You cannot you cannot obey the chain of command when the chain of command is telling you to neglect a farad. So if you are in the armed forces and you are seeing what you're seeing and you are trained to defend people, you are trained to fight against armies, you have weaponry trained in the armies, then you are obligation to utilize that. And you're in an obligation to break the chain of command. This is what the Sheikh is saying. He is saying very clear, what are you waiting for? Don't wait for the rulers. We know they've, in essence, he's not said this, but in essence, they have sold out. We know this. It is absolutely clear. 100%. Whatever the ruler, they have sold out, sadly. This is a reality. So what are you waiting for? This has to be a call. And I implore the Ummah, I implore every single one of us that at the very least speak about this, one. Secondly, speak to the scholars. Encourage them. You know, I know, even they know that it's an obligation, but it needs to be said. At the very least, you need to say it. Make it clear. Make it an opinion. Make it a pressure. Make it a movement within the Muslim world that the armies need to move. And we need to break this fear. Because if we say this, and we start to gather the momentum of the ummah, that will then affect those in positions of power, then maybe inshallah we will see, bi'idhnillah, the armies move. Maybe a small trickle, and it will gather pace. And those professional armies that will engage in military intervention to defend against a people, a Muslim people facing a genocide, that inshallah the ummah will come out, absolutely 2 billion of us behind you to do this. So we need to try and get this. And then if we do this, who else do we need? We have the power and the support of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What more power, what more support do we need? When the Sahaba, when they heard this hadith, remember, the Sahaba were only few in number compared to the great empires of Roman and Persian. Yet the Prophet ﷺ, he prophesied in hadith about the conquest of Rome and the conquest of Persia. In the very famous narration during the Battle of Khandaq, and this was a time where the Muslims were facing a siege upon Medina, and they had to build a trench in order to create, what they call trench warfare, defensible positions against the Qurayshi army, and they gathered huge amounts of numbers. And the Jewish tribes in Medina, in the outskirts of Medina, some of them had rebelled against the Muslims as well. So they were facing, two potential fronts. But before that, they had to build this trench. And there was this big rock, and the Sahaba couldn't destroy it. They couldn't clear it out of the way with their pickaxes. And so they gave it to the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet ﷺ, he raised his hands in dua. And after making dua, he struck it. And the first strike, a third of it fell off. And sparks flew. He did it a second time. Another spark came off, and a third of it came. And he did it the third time, and he hit it, a spark came off, and it was completely crumbled and destroyed. And he turned to the Sahaba. I remember the Sahaba at this time, they were in a very weakened situation. They were facing a siege on Medina. They were facing a massive 10,000 man mushrikeen army that was trying to wipe out Islam. They were just one city state, Medina. That was what they were at that time. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said, I seen a vision in these 3 sparks. And the Prophet ﷺ, he said, I saw the conquest of Persia, of Rome, and of Yemen and Hadur al-Maut. These areas, these 3 areas. And this gladdened the hearts of the believers, even in this weakened state. They knew all they had to do was be steadfast and patient, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will grant them victory. But you know who weren't? Who were mocking it? When the Prophet ﷺ, he gave this prophecy, the munafiqeen of Medina, those who pretended to be Muslims, they would say, we are scared to go to the toilet, to use the toilet at night, because we are scared of an attack, internally or externally. And yet the Prophet ﷺ is talking about the conquest of Persia, Rome, and Yemen. So who are we going to be? If we were at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, would we be on the side of the munafiqeen saying we're too weak? How could we defeat these empires? How could we defeat the Qurayshi army? Or are we going to be on the side of the believers, Allah, His Messenger, and the companions of the Prophet ﷺ? In the same way, are we going to be on the side of the people of Gaza? Are you those people in the armies who are guarding the borders of Israel at this moment in time? Are you going to be on the side of the ummah, at the side of Allah and His Messenger? Or are you going to be resurrected with the Zionists on the Day of Judgment? Think about that. Think about that. Because this Grand Mufti, this Sheikh from Libya has made it absolutely clear. Even if there's a few, you need to break the chain of command, because that will gather pace from those people, armed personnel. But in reality, the armed personnel of the Muslims reaches in the millions. So let's stop being the scum on the ocean. Let's at least speak out. Call for the people of capability and power. Critique and criticize those that stop us from engaging in this call, and critique and criticize those people who are stopping the armies from really enacting the liberation of Masjid al-Aqsa and of Palestine. This is what we need. We need to do this. And if we don't do this, then to be quite frank, on the day of judgment, every single one of us is going to be accountable based upon our capability. If our capability is in the armed forces and we have the capability because we're, soldiers, then you're going to be accountable for that. If your capability is a scholar that could issue a fatwa, then you're going to be accountable for that. If you just have a small YouTube following, or if you're just an individual, but you may know somebody, then you're going to be accountable for that. That if you know somebody from the armed forces, to speak to them, that's all you need to do. Every one of us is going to be accountable. And we need to break this, this fear, this climate of fear, and get this message out there, inshallah, to build this movement as best as we possibly can, that no United Nations, no ICJ, no America, no Europe, no ICC is going to come to rescue the Palestinians. It's got to come from the Ummah with the support and the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And all we have to do is take one step forward, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will take 2 steps to us. We walk to Allah, Allah will run to us. So this is my message to you. This is the message from the Sheikh. Inshallah, let's try and heed as best as possible this message, and at the very least talk about this as best as we possibly can. Build this as an opinion, build this as a movement, because everything starts with, firstly, speaking, changing. The Quran is the speech of Allah. It came with words that changed hearts, that changed nations, that created civilizations. So we need to speak, return back to the Quran and the Sunnah, return back to speaking about this as an obligation, so it changes hearts, and therefore actions can come about and manifest. From building this ummah as a civilization again, building an army that can actually utilize the resources that it has in order to enact the freedom and the liberation of the Muslims of Palestine and the protection of life. Jazakallah khair. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.